Judgment's zenith drifted in sovereign stillness, a monument forged from crystalline alloys mined in the hollow hearts of extinguished moons. Orbiting Arcos like a frozen scream, it shimmered with the encoded laws of the Triarch Dominion. Each etched glyph a ruling, each glowing strut a verdict. It was not merely a station, it was ideology in orbit. Every surface glinted with Imperium, reflecting back the light of 1,000 subjugated cultures. The Dominion believed law should not merely govern, it should blind. Inside, vaulted chambers echoed with ceremony, polished silence enforced by neural dampeners and rank pheromones. Here, justice had been distilled into performance. Tribunals were not held for truth, but for spectacle, for the roaring applause of elites fattened on conquest. From above, the stars watched in their ancient indifference. From below, the planet Arcos cast its storms toward the void. Between them hovered a tribunal built not to hear, but to be heard. And today, Earth would be remembered or erased. Chains clinked like punctuation as Del Raines was led through the tribunal spectacle. His gait was uneven, but not uncertain, each limp a letter in a sentence written in defiance. His face bore Dominion craftsmanship, a half-healed interrogation scar that traced the arc of a once passionate speech silenced by force. They had tried to erase him, but even silence can hold shape. He wore no regalia now, just the neutral gray of planetary custody, but the eyes behind the wound remained clear, unbroken. In his cuffed hands, hidden in the folds of procedural linen, he held a fractured ceremonial tablet, shard of the original Earth Dominion Accord. Not a legal tool, a statement. He raised his head as the chamber came into view. Above him hung hollow banners of past Dominion triumphs, edited truths glinting like knives. Before him, thrones of obsidian and flame. And around him, the laughter of the powerful. The Triarchs descended, each in a flourish of light and phenomenal dominance. Archon Lurex Varn led, clad in sentient silk that pulsed with every word he spoke. His voice rose not in anger, but indulgence, as though addressing a misbehaving pet. He called Del a curiosity, an anthropological remnant, then accused him of disseminating illegal poetic constructs, verses that undermined loyalty conditioning among the lesser species. Screens flashed distorted fragments of Terran resistance poetry, twisted into nonsense. One verse morphed into a dance meme. Another was underscored with sound effects meant to ridicule. Such dangerous syllables, Lurex purred, such rebellion, in rhyme. The crowd laughed, but Del said nothing. He stared at the floating lines of corrupted verse, not with regret, with mourning. Erin Toval sat behind a wall of translation drones, her robe marked with the glyph of clerical neutrality. She was invisible by design, a transcriber without opinion, a lens without memory. But within her neural interface, a private library bloomed. Hidden among court records were Terran poems, manifestos, forbidden treatises about agency, compassion, dissent. She watched Del not as a defendant, but as a signal. His presence defied the algorithmic quiet of the tribunal. His silence rang louder than most verdicts. As the indictment grew more theatrical, her fingers trembled slightly over the input glyphs. She did not record every insult. She recorded the moment his knuckles whitened on the broken shard. She was not the only one watching, but she was the only one remembering. With a flick of his wrist, Del lifted the object that had survived Earth's fall. A ceremonial shard, marble from the Earth Dominion Treaty signing, once embedded in the walls of the Terran consulate on Galdus Prime. Cracked during the assault, smuggled out during the firebombing of the embassy. He held it not outward, but against his chest. Dominion guards had scanned it, laughed. A primitive relic, allowed through as a token of futility. But the shard was not inert. Its engraved clauses shimmered with old code, language written before Dominion revisionism, before censorship protocols learned to forget. Its fracture line curved in the exact trajectory of a severed alliance. Del ran his thumb along it, as if invoking memory. He said nothing as he raised it into view, its surface catching tribunal light. Holo recorders zoomed. Commentators chuckled. Somewhere, a popular feed labeled the image, Petty Planetarian Plays Martyr. But Aaron gasped. The glyphs were glowing. The moment arrived with the weight of ritual. By custom, intoned Archon Varn, the accused may offer final words before sentencing. We anticipate great sorrow, some nostalgic pleading, and perhaps a whimper for mercy. He waved a jeweled hand. Let the relics speak. Del did not bow. He did not thank them. Instead, he spoke in Dominion High Script, a language most humans could not pronounce, let alone weaponize. The dialect used in ancient treaties, long before the Empire rewrote its own myths. I invoke the final reckoning, he said. A pause. Then chaos. Laughter erupted. Somewhere, someone spilled a wineglass. One triarch howled with glee. Varn leaned forward, delighted. The right of oratory combat? You would challenge a tribunal verdict with poetry. He clapped mockingly. By all means, entertain us. The first lines fell quiet, measured, rhythmic, anchored in Dominion cadence, an ancient linguistic form designed to nest in neural folds, to echo across memory cycles. It was how their ancestors once cast law, not as ruling, but as binding truth. The laughter faltered. Del's voice was not angry. It was ceremonial. The air around him shifted, not by volume, but by frequency. Intonation tuned to the Dominion's own archival resonance. The kind used in coronations, in succession oaths, in declarations of galactic war. Each word landed like a stone against the walls of denial. In the third row, a young functionary began to weep, unsure why. Aaron's eyes widened as the phrases aligned with forgotten precedents. Obscure codes buried in pre-imperial memory vaults. The final reckoning was not just speech. It was invocation. Varn's smile began to twitch. Del took one step forward, then another, and behind his voice, something began to stir. The voice did not rise in anger. It began as a whisper, the sort that slipped beneath the skin, not through volume, but shape. A rhythm, old and unfamiliar, yet instantly recognized by those bred to forget. There was once a songbird. Del spoke in the cradle tones of Dominion ceremonial cadence. It was caught not for its feathers, but its voice. The masters gilded its cage and silenced its song with pain. But in time, it learned to hum through its wounds. The laughter that had moments before danced across the chamber now stalled, clumsy and incomplete. The cadence was ancestral, a pattern once engraved in genetic memory, the kind that activated protocol, that summoned the instinct to listen. Del's words curled through the tribunal, bypassing pride and mocking and neural dampeners alike. The bird was told its voice had no value, that harmony belonged to its captors. So it learned a melody no jailer could name. Even Varn blinked, and Del continued, not to protest, not to beg, but to weave. Not a defense, but an incantation of memory buried deep. It was not defiance. It was return. The chamber grew uneasy, not visibly, but deeply. Spectators shifted without knowing why. Something in the rhythm, the pitch, the unthinkable familiarity of the Terran voice. It didn't belong to him, and yet it did. Lurex Varn's smile faltered. The voice did not stumble. Drifted it found Dominion tonality, a navigating vowels from crystalline alloys mind, syllables structured like ancient extinguished moons. It was language orbiting arcos like a frozen stream, but remembered. It shimmered with the Del was not imitating the triarch's conquest. He was activating glyph, a spectral judges leaned forward without realizing. It was not merely a station, nothing out of order. It was ideology, no screams, orbit, no fire, every surface no glinted with imperial. Only words, reflecting and those words the light of a somewhere a minor clerk stopped breathing. The Dominion she remembered those sounds from a hymn her grandmother hummed during blackouts. Inside, it was from before. Vaulted chambers. This wasn't rebellion with ceremony. This was recognition. Polished silence. Then came the slice by neural dampeners. Del's voice shifted. Rank pheromones. No longer song, but scalpel. Justice had been distilled. He turned language into a blade. Tribunals were not held for carefully lacquered myths of the Dominion, for the roaring of victories and massacres, uncovering legends that had been from above. Too clean. The stars watched. You don't erase truth, ancient indifference. You dress in
below
costume.
the planet,
You make it
Arcos
sing your
cast
anthem
its
storms
storms
toward the
toward the
void.
He cited
Between them
texts
hovered a
once considered
tribunal
holy,
built not to
now
hear,
scrubbed from
but
public
to be
record.
heard.
He spoke
And
of the
today,
Scour Pact.
Earth would be remembered
not
as
or
unification.
Chains
Disarmament
clinked like
by
punctuation.
He
as
recounted the
Del Reigns
genocide
was
on
led
Telner
through the
V
tribunal
as the
spectacle.
glorious
His gait
absorption.
was uneven.
He did not shout,
but not
he annotated
uncertain.
their past.
Each limp a
Each
letter
revelation
and sentence
paced
written
with
in
precision,
defiance.
matching
His
the
face
metronomic
bore
Dominion
Dominion
craftsmanship,
ceremonial
a
rhythm.
half-healed
With
interrogation
every
scar
truth he
that
unearthed,
traced the arc
the
of
audience
a once
leaned
passionate
further
speech,
inward, silenced
caught in
by
the gravity
force.
of words
They had
too
tried to
old
erase him,
refute,
but
and
even
too
silence
dangerous
can
to
hold
repeat.
shape.
Aaron
He wore
Tovel's
no
hands
regalia
hovered
now,
above her interface,
just a neutral
frozen.
gray of planetary
He was naming
custody.
things she had only
But the
read in
eyes behind the
footnotes of
wound
forbidden
remained
files.
clear.
He wasn't
unbroken.
breaking Dominion
In his
law.
cuffed hands,
He was reminding,
hidden in the folds
next came
of
the names.
procedural linen.
One by
He
one,
held a fractured
Del
ceremonial
recited them,
tablet,
not as
shard of the
accusations,
original,
but as
Earth Dominion
verses in a
Accord.
long-forgotten
Not legal
litany.
tool.
A
Scholars,
statement.
explorers,
He raised his head
artists,
as the chamber
dissidents.
came into view.
Each officially
Above him
discontinued
hung hollow
by the
banners
state.
of past
Each
Dominion
unspoken
triumphs,
for centuries.
edited truths.
The tone was not
glinting
mournful.
like knives.
It was reverent.
Before him,
He spoke them
thrones of
chronologically,
obsidian,
binding
and flame.
each to the
And
next
around
through
him,
rhythm,
the laughter
and
of the
alliteration.
powerful.
Crafting a structure that
descended,
Dominion ancestors
each in a flourish of
once used
light
to swear allegiance.
and phenomenal
The
dominance.
chamber's air grew
Archon
heavy,
Lurex
not with
Varnland,
atmosphere,
clad
but
in
memory.
sentient silk
With every
that
name,
pulsed with
someone in
every
the
word
hall
he
stirred.
spoke.
Unsure
His voice
why.
rose
Because
not in
memory
anger,
has weight,
but
and the
indulgence.
tribunal of spectacle,
as though addressing
for all its
misbehaving
theater,
pet.
had no defense
He called
against
Del a
remembrance.
curiosity.
A faint hum began,
an anthropological
not mechanical,
remnant,
but biological.
then accused him of disseminating
Neural
illegal
resonators
poetic
dormant in
constructs,
Dominion biology,
verses that
flickered
undermined
awake.
loyalty.
The names aligned
conditioning
with genetic
among the
legacy.
lesser species.
And in the silence,
Screens
that followed
flashed,
the final name,
distorted
the
fragments
court
of
realized
Terran
what they were
resistance
hearing.
poetry.
They were hearing
twisted
themselves.
into nonsense.
And once
one
Del
verse
continued
morphed
softer
into a dance
now.
meme.
Another was
child
underscored with
tutor.
sound effects.
What does freedom
meant
mean?
to ridicule?
The chamber froze.
Such dangerous
No such
syllables
question
had
Lurex
public
purged.
context.
No
Such
record.
rebellion,
And yet
in Rome.
every elder
The crowd
present knew
laughed.
It
It was
Del
a
said
story
nothing.
passed in hushes.
He stared at the
A
floating
myth too
lines of
dangerous
corrupted verse.
for repetition.
Not with
A
regret.
thought so
with
pure
mourning.
the Dominion
Aaron
buried it
Tovel
in
sat
bureaucracy.
behind a wall
The
of
tutor filed a
translation
report.
drones.
Del
Her
said.
robe marked with
There
the
was no
glyph
answer.
of clerical
He
neutrality.
paused.
She
But the
was
question
invisible
remained.
by design.
He stepped
A
forward,
transcriber
eyes
without
burning
opinion,
not with fury,
a lens
but
without
sorrow.
memory.
So within
I
her
will
neural
answer.
interface,
And he
a
did,
private,
not with a
library
definition,
loomed.
but
Hidden
with a
among
description,
court records were
with
Terran
images and
poems,
memories,
manifestos,
with human and
forbidden
alien
treatises
struggles
about
alike.
agency.
He described
compassion,
freedom
dissent.
not as lawless
She watched
motion,
Del not as a
but as
defendant,
agency,
but as a
the
signal.
ability to
His
choose
presence
silence
defied
or song,
the algorithmic
to build,
quiet
to
of the
refuse,
tribunal.
to dream
His silence
outside
rang
the diagram.
louder than most verdicts.
And he ended with this.
As the indictment
Silence is
grew
not forgetting.
more theatrical.
Silence is waiting.
Her fingers trembled
Somewhere in the
slightly
tribunal
over the
ceiling,
input
the
glyphs.
sentencing timer
She did not
expired.
record
No
every
tone.
insult. No announcement.
She recorded the moment
No guards
his
emerged
knuckles
to halt the
whitened
speech.
on the broken shard.
The protocol
She was not
simply
the only one watching.
missed its cue,
but she was the
Centuries
only one
of
remembering.
Dominion
With a flick of his
precision
wrist,
collapsed
Del
under
lifted the
ancient
object
cadence,
that had survived
an impossible
Earthfall.
familiarity. A ceremonial
Del
shard
finished the reckoning.
Marble from the
Finished.
Earth Dominion
His
treaty
final
signing.
syllable
Once
echoing
embedded in
across
the
the
walls
chamber's
of the Terran
crystalline
consulate
walls,
on Galdus,
reverberating against
cracked during the
architecture,
assault,
never meant
smuggled
to
out
hold truth.
during the firebombing
He stood still
of the embassy.
No one moved.
He held it not
the
outward,
triarchs,
but against his
not
chest.
the guards,
Dominion
not the
guards had
spectators.
scanned it, laughed.
Then,
slowly,
a primitive
Del
relic,
turned,
allowed
his gait
through as a
remained
token
uneven.
of futility.
His face,
But the shard was not
unreadable,
inert,
but his
its
steps were
engraved
unhurried.
clauses
Measured,
shimmered
like
with old
punctuation.
code.
He passed
Language
Triarch
written
Varn
before
without
Dominion
flinch
revision
or
is
glance.
before censorship
Varn,
protocols
once
learned
thunderous
to forget.
in mockery,
Its fracture
now
line
stared with
curved in the
unspoken
exact
calculation.
trajectory
No
of a
orders
severed
came.
alliance.
No binding
Del
snapped.
ran his
The
thumb
rules had
along
not
it,
broken,
as if
they had
invoking
been
memory.
fulfilled.
He
A
said
reckoning,
nothing as
by
he
its
raised
own
it into
ancient
view.
claws,
Its
demanded
surface catching
completion.
tribunal
And
light.
Del had completed
Hollow
it.
recorders zoomed.
He exited the
Commentators
tribunal
chuckled.
not as a
Somewhere,
prisoner,
a popular
but as a voice
feed
the
labeled
Empire
the
could
image.
no longer
Petty
unhear.
planetarian
Aaron's
plays
fingers
martyr.
trembled as
But
she
Aaron
completed the
gasped.
archival
The
code.
glyphs were glowing.
Her voice,
The moment
barely a
arrived
whisper,
with the weight of
joined the
ritual.
last line.
By custom,
The Empire may
intoned
not fault
Archon
the war,
Varn,
but it
the
will remember
accused may
what it
offer
tried to
final
forget.
words before
She
sentencing.
encrypted the record
We
with layered
anticipate
ciphers,
great sorrow
hidden deep
some
within a
nostalgic
neutral lexicon.
pleading,
And
labeled
perhaps a
only
whimper
vocal
for
reckoning.
mercy.
Verified.
He waved a jewel hand.
It would not survive
Let the
in
relics
court
speak.
databases.
Dell did not
It would
bow.
exist.
He did not
She
thank
leaned
them.
back,
Heart
instead. He
Dell had
spoke in Dominion High
Dominion
Script,
truth,
in
a
Dominion
language most humans could
before
not
Dominion
pronounce,
judges, let alone
and they had
weaponize.
listened.
The
Not because they
dialect
wanted
used
to,
ancient
because they
treaties,
had to.
long
It
before
was
the
not
Empire
revolution.
rewrote its own
Not
myths.
yet. But
I
memory
invoked
had
the
been
final
made.
reckoning,
And
he
memory,
said. Once
pause.
awakened, does
Then
not
chaos.
die quietly.
Laughter erupted.
Across Judgment
Somewhere,
Zenith,
someone spilled
loop
a wine
feeds
glass.
replayed
One
fragments
triarch
of the
howled
reckoning.
with glee.
Low-tier
Varn
guards
leaned
recited
forward,
the
delighted.
fable under
The
their
right
breath.
of oratory
Technicians
combat.
whispered
You
about
would
the
challenge
cadence.
a tribunal
Scholars
verdict
compared
with
glyphs
poetry
to extinct
He clapped
dialects.
mockingly.
Even
By all
diplomats
means,
from other
entertain
subjugated
us.
systems
The first
requested
lines fell
translations.
quiet.
Eager
Measured,
to taste
rhythmic,
whatever poison the
anchored
Terran
in
had dared
dominion
to speak.
cadence.
Del,
An ancient
returned to
linguistic
his
form
cell,
designed to
sat in
nest in
silence.
neural folds,
But his silence
echo
now rang
across
louder
memory
than most
cycles.
speeches. It was how their
Triarch Varn
ancestors
stood
once
in the
cast
empty
law,
tribunal chamber,
not as
surrounded
ruling,
by
but
floating
as
echoes
binding
of a
truth.
voice that should
The
never
laughter
have spoken
faltered.
that well. Del's voice
That
was
deep,
not angry.
that
It
true.
was ceremonial.
His hands were
The air
clasped
around
behind
his
his
shifted.
back.
He was
not
not
by
amused.
volume, but
He was
by
calculating.
frequency.
Across
Intonation
the
tuned
one
to the
word began
Dominion's
to
own
surface in
archival
encrypted
resonance.
conversations, the
In
kind
hushed
used
prayer
in
loops,
coronations,
in
in
academic
succession
grades.
oaths.
In
In declarations
Del
of
had not
galactic
sparked
war.
rebellion.
Each word
He had done
landed
something
like a
far
stone
worse.
against the walls.
He had
of
reminded them
denial.
what it meant to
In the
remember.
third row,
They
a
tried
young
to erase
functionary
it.
began to
The
weep,
reckoning was
unsure
excised
why.
from court logs.
Aaron's eyes
purged
widened
from Dominion
as the
neural
phrases
archives,
aligned with
memory
forgotten
locked under
precedents.
17 tiers
Obscure
of
codes
classification.
buried in
But the words
pre-imperial
didn't
memory
vanish.
vaults. The
They
final
echoed.
reckoning
Maintenance
was not
drones
just speech.
began humming
It was
strange
invocation.
cadences while repairing
Varn's smile
viaducts.
began to twitch.
On warships,
Del took
calibration
one step
screens
forward,
flickered
then
with
another,
lines of verse.
and behind his voice,
a voice in a
something
cage
began to
still
stir.
sings.
The voice did
Not
not
air,
rise
not
in anger.
sabotage.
It began as
Contagion.
a whisper. Rogue
The sort
AI
that
nodes
slipped
repeated
beneath
the
Del's
skin, fable mid
not through volume,
not full
but
phrases.
A
Just
rhythm,
rhythms,
old and
refrains.
unfamiliar.
Engineers
Yet
called
instantly
it
recognized by
resonant
those
ghosting.
bred to
Psych
forget.
evaluation
There
flagged
was once a
crews
songbird.
for anomalous
Del
grief.
spoke.
No
in
source
the
could be
cradle tones of
isolated.
Dominion
No
ceremonial
vectors could be
cadence.
found. It was
Because
caught
it
not
wasn't
with
with
feathers,
but its
it was in the
voice.
form.
The
The
Dominion had
masters
forgotten
gilded its
rhythm
cage
could
and
carry
silenced
truth.
its song.
That
with
memory
pain.
could
But in
bypass
time,
firewalls if
it
disguised
learned to
as
hum
song.
through its
And now the
wounds.
truth
The
bled
laughter
from
that had
system to
moments
system.
before danced
Not
across
like
the chamber
data,
now stalled,
but like a virus
clumsy
engineered by
and
poets.
incomplete.
They built the
The
Dominion
cadence was
to resist
ancestral,
armies.
a pattern
They forgot
once
to defend
engraved in
against
genetic
meaning.
memory.
In the mining
The kind
vaults
that
of
activated
Marnith's
protocol,
reach,
human
that
laborers
summoned the
began to
instinct
murmur
listen.
while working.
Del's words
Not
curled
chants,
through the
not
tribunal,
slogans,
bypassing
just lines,
pride and
bent
mocking
phrases
neural dampers
shaped like the
alike.
reckoning.
The bird
And
was
then the
told
drill
its voice
stopped,
had no
not
value.
from sabotage,
That harmony
from
belonged
silence.
to its captors.
Supervisors
So it learned a
barked
melody
orders,
no
but found their
jailer
own
could
words
name.
hollow.
Even Varn
Security
blinked,
attempted
and
force,
Del
but
continued
their own
not to
AI
protest,
interfaces
not to
replayed
beg,
Del's
but to
speech
weave.
fragments,
Not
mid
a
command.
defense.
No one
but an
raised a weapon.
incantation
No one
of
struck a
memory
blow,
buried
but no
deep.
Terran moved. It was not
One
defiance.
miner whispered,
It was
"We do
return.
not break."
The chamber
We
grew
bend,
uneasy.
then we sing.
Not visibly, but deeply. Spectators shifted without knowing why. Something in the rhythm, the pitch, the unthinkable familiarity of the Terran voice. It didn't belong to him, and yet it did. Lurex Varn's smile faltered. The rebellion began, not in flame, but in rhythm. No blood, no demands, just the song of a story they hadn't known they remembered. The Dominion labeled it a containment anomaly, but mold grows where marble cracks. Marshal Krell Vark didn't believe in symbolism. He believed in vectors. And Del Raines, to him, was not a diplomat. He was a viral agent wrapped in flesh. Vark read the mimetic contamination logs in silence. 67 confirmed auditory echoes, 29 verbal outbreaks, and the infection curve exponential. Mimetics are warfare, he snarled. Cut the metaphor from the memory. He ordered Del stripped of all stimuli, removed food flavor, dimmed light variance, crushed time awareness. Interrogators were instructed to use neural flensing, extracting cognition layer by layer, until the song structure broke. But even under dissection, Del's brain pulsed with rhythm. No scream, just meter. The scanners recorded his cognition patterns. They matched Dominion oath cadence. And Vark, for the first time in 30 years of statecraft, didn't know where the war was happening anymore. Lynn Avey lived beneath 16 identities. Once Earth's cultural attaché, now erased from records, she lived between pulse signatures and cargo manifests. But even in exile, she carried one truth: Earth hadn't died in silence. It had sung, and now she made sure the melody traveled. She encoded Del's reckoning into children's language kits, into liturgical pattern matrices, into textile folding programs used by artisan bots. No phrase stayed intact, but no message was lost. Her greatest success, a devotional program downloaded by 9,000 Dominion loyalists. They sang the fable as prayer. None knew the source. All felt the shift. He made them listen, she whispered as she watched a prayer loop on the cadence. Not rebellion. Not yet. But the faith of the Empire was starting to tremble. She arrived in Dell's cell clothed in bureaucratic insignificance. Form 83R, subsection 7, Archival Reassessment. A fiction. Inside, Dell sat cross-legged, scarred hands resting on knees, gaze far away. "Teach me," she said. He studied her, not with suspicion, but recognition. Then he spoke. Terran poetic structure. Rhyme as camouflage. Cadence as infection. Metaphor as code. "You fear rebellion," he told her. "But your empire fears something deeper." He tapped his chest. "You fear rhythm that remembers truth." He taught her resistance ballads, wrapped in market lingo. Love poems tuned to Dominion command syntax. Fables that fit perfectly into broadcast calibration loops. Aaron listened, absorbed, transcribed. Every line felt like trespassing. Every line felt like coming home. When she left, her hands trembled. Not from fear, from purpose. She tested it. A minor court memo, disguised as administrative recap. She rewrote it in Terran cadence. Paused every fifth glyph. Structured the final line with internal rhyme. No one noticed, until the clerk reading it cried. No visible trigger. No audit alarm. He simply read, then wept. The memo was archived. But the waveform, recorded by automated systems, entered the Dominion archive. Later, a priest reviewing system logs paused, rewound the memo feed, and whispered, "This feels familiar." Aaron watched the ripple begin. It wasn't code. It was infection, meaning writing structure, memory hiding inside form. The words were no longer just read. They were felt. The triarchs assembled under the crisis glyph. Varn stormed the center dais, voice sharpened with fury. "Erase him. Soul wipe. Strip the cells. Turn his blood to ash and his name to air." Another triarch, elder and slow-eyed, raised a claw. "If we remove him now, what remains cannot be contained." The voice becomes legend. Varn spat. "He is legend already." The third triarch said nothing, but his talons tapped the council table, slow, steady, rhythmic. The others noticed. He stopped. "His reckoning still plays," said the elder. "On court echo channels. In private shrines. In dreams." Varn stared, eyes burning. "Then we poison the water," he whispered. "Make memory itself treason." But even he knew it was too late. The Dominion had built an empire immune to guns. But not to story. Dell sat against the wall, breathing shallow, skin pale from days of deprivation. Aaron waited. "No fiction this time." "I knew," he said. "We weren't ready. Earth would fall." And it did. He turned, slowly. "But it had to be close. I had to be near enough to speak this far." His voice was barely sound, but it still held the cadence. This wasn't about saving Earth. He pulled a crystalline node from beneath the floor mat, transparent, inert to scans. But inside, rhythm-locked audio, tuned to emotional receptors. "This next step," he whispered, "isn't for the mind." He placed it in her hand. "It's for the heart." Aaron stood at her private terminal, node trembling in her fingers. She uploaded it into an isolated echo loop, wrapped in Dominion prayer architecture. At first, the system resisted. Then it adapted. She layered Dell's voice into ceremonial vibration bands, tuned the tone to sacred resonance. Then she played it, not loudly, just precisely. And across 1,000 court nodes, something shifted. Monitors blinked without trigger. Clerks paused mid-thought. Priests lost place in prayer. They didn't hear words. They felt them. Grief without memory. Hope without context. A pulse in the bones that whispered of something before. Aaron watched the waveform stabilize. Not a speech. Not a broadcast. A pulse. It would spread. Not like rebellion. Like remembrance. She left the cell in silence. No alarm. No resistance. The guards didn't stop her. They stood motionless, faces blank. One hummed. Dell stared at the wall. Eyes half-lidded. Voice low. "They built the lies so well," he said. "They turned history into performance." He looked down at his hands. "But you can't kill meaning. You can only delay it. The lights flickered just once. He smiled. It was never about Earth. Outside, Dominion thoughtnets shuddered. In transport queues, workers whispered forgotten phrases. A warship paused mid-maneuver to replay a fragment of an unmarked file labeled vocal_sequence_D001_RK. The empire that believed in total memory control had heard something it could not unhear. And beneath the weight of perfect control, something had started to bleed. Not in the halls, in the hearts. Del was wheeled into the central tribunal plaza beneath a sky engineered to remain unclouded. Surveillance drones hovered with predatory stillness. Every lens tracked his every twitch. He wore chains etched with Dominion verdict glyphs, a sensory inhibitor embedded at the base of his skull. The inhibitor's muted taste, touch, light time. Only sound remained. The last mercy and the final weapon. Dominion citizens tuned in by the billions. This was to be spectacle, closure, an execution soaked in ceremonial righteousness. The plaza was lined with banners quoting ancient law. From order, peace. From peace, silence. A choir began the psalm of justice. Del smiled. Not wide, not defiant, just enough to be remembered. No plea escaped his lips. No protest rose from his throat. He simply watched the crowd, head held high, as if surveying a theater that didn't yet know the performance was over. One of the guards glanced down, uncertain for the first time. In his presence, silence didn't feel like dominance. It felt like anticipation. The executioner approached with a voice amplifier laced in ceremonial chimes. He raised the sentence document, woven in light and law. Then Judgment's zenith drifted across the Dominion, sovereign stillness. Private temples, a monument forged from crystalline alloys, not noise, in the hollow but disruption of extinguished something deeper. Moons. Citizens orbiting looked arcos like a frozen screen. Memorial streams. It shimmered with the encoded sacred of the ancestral rituals that replayed etched family lineages and last each glowing strut of verdict. Flickered. It was not dissolved. Merely a station. In their place, it was ideology in orbit. Not live. Every not surface glinted, but inlaid like with imperium skin, reflecting the empire's the most sacred silence subjugated cultures. And its firewalls didn't resist. Law should not. They didn't even recognize the threat. It should blind. The voice bled inside into ancestral vaulted chambers, echoed not with through ceremony. Through ritual silence, the exact cadence neural of inherited and rank pheromones. A whisper wrapped in reverence. Justice had been distilled into performance. No override. Tribunals were not held for truth as right, but for spectacle. Del's voice spread, for the roaring not as command of elites, but as fattened on conquest. In the Dominion, from above, so armed the stars watched in their ancient and fear the familiar. From below, the voice spoke. The planet and Arcos cast its storms toward the void. In Terran between them hovered a tribunal carried the wound of exile, here, sharp to be human. In Old Dominion, Earth would be like a myth, or half-remembered, half-chains clinked like punctuations as it vibrated against the memory of the tribunal spectacle. Reactivating his long-abandoned uneven, neural harmonics but not for their ability to feel each limp a letter in a sentence Del spoke written in defiance. As no Terran should. His face bore Dominion craftsmanship. He said, when we all half-healed interrogation scar that traced the arc of a once passionate speech. Instead, he spoke of silence. They had tried to erase a mother forgets but even silence can hold shade. Of the instant a city he wore no regalia applause over just the neutral gray of the day, planetary language, but the eyes behind the wound he turned clear against its makers. In his recalled the Dominion's greatest hero, folds of who sang an oath so perfect he held a fractured ceremonial tablet. Then he whispered, "Shard, the original died screaming in your archives." Not a legal tool. He spoke not as a martyr. He raised his head as a mirror as the chamber. Each word made old wounds above him hung hollow banners. Each syllable reminded them how it felt to hear the truth before the silence glinting like knives. And across the empire, before him, people remembered thrones of obsidian, visual overlays, and around him, the unsanctioned, unauthorized, the triarchs descended. One half of every screen showed Terran children running through fire. Archon Lurex Varn not pixel sanitized, clad in sentient silk that pulsed with every word he spoke. His other half rose not in temples collapsing but under their own weight, as though addressing crumbling, misbehaving, fire spreading. He called Del not defeat, curiosity, but memory. And Del's voice wove between images, then accused him of disseminating not illegal poetic constructs. Truth verses that undermined loyalty conditioning. It wears scars among the lesser Dominion species. Funeral music, screens flash, minor chord, distorted fragments of Terran resistance poetry chants, twisted into nonsense. Then unified. One verse morphed, tried to look away. Another was underscored with sound effects, not from guilt to ridicule, but from a strange such dangerous syllable. Grief, knows no
Lurex
empire.
heard.
One
Such
line
rebellion
repeated across
Enron.
all nodes.
The crowd laughed,
Etched into
but Dell said
diagnostic
nothing.
overlays.
He stared at the
Burned into
floating
background
lines of
scripts,
corrupted verse,
appearing in
not with
translated
regret,
variants
with mourning.
across
Aaron
70
Toval
Dominion
sat behind a
dialects.
wall of
Truth isn't what you
translation
hide.
drones.
It's
Her
what you
robe
fear
marked
will
with the
survive.
glyph of clerical
Archivist scrambled.
neutrality.
Code
She was
teams
invisible by
deployed,
design.
override
A
protocols.
transcriber without
None
opinion.
worked.
A
The
lens
phrase wasn't
without
executable,
memory.
but
It was
within her
rhythmic,
neural interface,
triggered by
a
memorial
private
cadence
library bloomed.
itself.
Hidden among
Buried
court
deep
records were
in
Terran
generational
poems,
reflection
manifestos,
forbidden
unremovable.
treatises about
every
agency,
attempt to delete
compassion,
it
dissent.
replicated the
She
phrase
watched
again,
Dell not as a
like a
defendant,
heartbeat,
but as
or
a
clock,
signal.
or a
His
reckoning.
presence defied
insolent
the
decay,
algorithmic
where
quiet
art once
of the tribunal.
thrived and was
His
later
silence
neutered.
rang louder
An
than
elder
most verdicts.
shuffled into
As the
plaza.
indictment grew
Once known
more
as the Empire's
theatrical,
voice,
her fingers
a poet who
trembled
vanished
slightly
after a
over the
controversial
input
recital.
glyphs. Now
She did not
labeled
record
culturally known.
every insult.
He stepped into the light.
She recorded the
His
moment
robes were
his
stitched with
knuckles
illegal
whitened on the
phrases.
broken shard.
His hand
She was
shook.
not the only
He
one
began
watching,
to recite,
but she was the
Dell's
only
final
one
lines.
remembering. With a
Not
flick of his
loudly,
wrist, Dell
but with the
lifted the
aching
object
precision
that
of
had
someone who
survived
hadn't
her
spoken
fall.
in decades.
A ceremonial
When he
shard.
finished,
He poured
marble
flint
from the
oil
Earth
over
Dominion
his
treaty
body.
signing.
No cries of
Once
alarm.
embedded in the
Only
walls of the
stillness.
Terran consulate
He struck
on
the
Galvis
match.
Prime.
The flame
Cracked during the
consumed
assault,
him in seconds.
smuggled out
And still,
during the
no
firebombing
screams
of the embassy.
Only listen.
He held it not
because
outward,
this wasn't
but against his
protest.
chest. It was
Dominion
remembrance
guards had scanned
burning
it, laughed.
itself back
A primitive
into history.
relic. And the
Allowed
Empire
through
could
as a
not
token
unsee
of
it.
futility.
Subfleet
But the
command
shard was
channels
not
did.
inert.
Not by
Its engraved
sabotage,
clauses
by refusal.
shimmered with old
Lieutenants
code.
reported harmonic
Language written
dissonance.
before Dominion
Psychological
revisionism,
drills,
before censorship
halted
protocols,
as
as
soldiers
soldiers
began to hum
its fracture
unfamiliar
line
cadences.
curved in the
One
exact
battalion
trajectory
chanted in
of a
Zath
severed
tone.
alliance.
Perfect rhythm.
Dell ran his
Unknown
thumb
meaning.
along it.
Medical
as if
scans
invoking
showed
memory.
no
He
contagion.
said nothing
Only
as he
pattern
raised it into
recognition.
view.
They were remembering
Its surface
something
catching
that had never been
tribunal
taught.
light.
Hollow
Orders
recorders
dissolved
zoomed.
into silence.
Commentators chuckled.
Superiors listened.
Somewhere, a
And
popular
in that
feed
stillness,
labeled
for
the
the first
image.
time, petty
No one
planetarian
spoke with
plays
authority.
martyr. Because
But Aaron
authority had
gasped.
forgotten how
The
to
glyphs
feel.
were glowing.
And now the
The
ranks
moment
remembered
arrived
what
with
it
the
meant to be
weight
human.
of ritual. Even when they
By
weren't.
custom, on
In
Trier
tones,
Archon
districts
Varn,
powered
the
down
accused
without
may
command.
offer final words
Memorial
before
parks
sentencing.
went dark.
We
Data
anticipate
psalms looped
great
in reverse.
sorrow. Some
Shrines began
nostalgic
reciting
pleading,
phrases that
and
no
perhaps
one
a
had
whimper
input.
for mercy.
Children
You waved
wept
a jewel
beside
hand.
monuments
Let the
they
relics
no
speak.
longer believed. Dell did not bow.
Adults followed.
He did not
They
thank
didn't
them.
know what they were mourning.
Instead, only
He
that
spoke
the
in
silence
Dominion
now
High script,
tasted like
a
rot.
language most
And
humans
across
could
the
not
dominions,
pronounce, let
something
alone weaponize.
unquantifiable
The
shifted.
dialect used
Not
in
rebellion,
ancient treaties,
not collapse,
long before
but
the Empire
confusion strong
rewrote
enough
its own
to halt
myths.
function.
I invoked
The
the
Empire
final
had
reckoning,
ruled
he
through
said.
precision.
A pause
through the
then
sterilization
chaos.
of grief. Laughter
And
erupted.
now grief
Somewhere,
returned.
someone spilled
Not
a
as
wine
weapon,
glass.
but as weather.
One triarch
No
howled
enemy
with glee.
ships arrived.
Varn leaned
No
forward,
battles were
delighted.
fought.
The
Only
right
feelings
of oratory
reawakened.
combat,
And the Empire
he would
had
challenge
no armor
a
for that.
tribunal verdict.
Dell was
with
seized
poetry.
mid-sentence.
He clapped
The inhibitors
mockingly.
sparked
By
to
all
life,
means,
overclocked.
entertain us.
Guards rushed
The first
in,
lines
weapons
fell
drawn.
quiet.
They
Measured,
dragged him through the
rhythmic,
tribunal gates,
anchored in
He coughed
Dominion
blood.
cadence.
His limbs
An
trembled,
ancient
but
linguistic
the voice
form
continued,
designed to nest
because
in
it no
neural
longer
folds
belonged to
to
him.
echo.
It was
across
embedded
memory
in
cycles.
Dominion reflection
It was how their
cycles,
ancestors
ritual
once
programs,
cast law,
atmosphere
not
prayers,
as ruling,
even if
but
silence
as binding
sang.
truth.
Even
The
as his
laughter
mouth
faltered.
filled with
Dell's
copper,
voice was
the
not
words
angry.
bloomed
It was
across
ceremonial.
space.
The
We
air
are
around
not
him
here to
shifted.
win.
We
Not
are
by
here
volume,
to be
but by
remembered.
frequency.
He collapsed
as
as
they
they
reached
reached
the
the
transfer
to the
corridor.
Dominion's own
One guard
archival
wept
resonance.
openly. Another
The
whispered
kind
his
used
own
in
name like it was
coronations.
new.
The
In
tribunal
succession
screens
oaths.
froze.
In
The verdict
declarations
remained
galactic war,
unspoken.
each word
because no one
landed
could
like a
remember
stone
what they were
against the
punishing
walls
anymore.
of denial.
Only why it had
In
started.
the third row,
And that was
a
enough.
young functionary
Dell
began
lay
to
broken,
weep,
unsure
body
why.
failing, but eyes
Aaron's
open.
eyes
One of the
widened
triarchs
as the
stepped
phrases
forward,
aligned with
silent
forgotten
as
precedents.
gravity.
Obscure
Leaned
codes
close.
buried in
Tell me,
pre-imperial memory
the ruler
vaults.
said.
The
"What are
final
you?"
reckoning
Dell
was
smiled
not just
through
speech.
blood.
His lips
It was
cracked.
invocation.
His voice
Varn's
a
smile
whisper.
began to twitch.
But it came through
Dell
every
took
speaker,
one step forward,
every shrine,
then another,
every
and
synaptic
behind his
ritual
voice,
node.
something began
Not because
to
it was
stir.
broadcast.
The voice did
because
not
it had been
rise in
prepared.
anger.
I am
It
your
began
joke,
as
he
a
said.
whisper,
The words
the sort that
echoed.
slipped beneath
Remember,
the skin,
the Triarch is
not
breath
through
caught,
volume.
but
Del
shape,
exhaled,
a rhythm,
slow
and final.
old and
Not a martyr's
unfamiliar,
end,
yet
but a
instantly
punctuation mark.
recognized by those
Behind him,
bred to
the
forget.
city lights flickered.
There was once a
Above,
songbird.
the memorial
Del
streams
spoke in the
dissolved
cradle
in
tones of
silence.
Dominion ceremonial
Not the
cadence.
enforced kind.
It was caught
The earned
not for
kind.
its feathers,
Across
but
the
its
stars,
voice.
an empire
The masters
paused
gilded its
and
cage
began for the
and
first time in
silenced its
generations
song with pain.
to listen.
But in time,
Del Reigns
it
was
learned to
declared
hum
dead.
through
No
its
remains.
wounds.
No
the laughter
procession,
that had moments
just an
before
edict,
danced across
a
the
sterile
chamber, now
line in
stalled,
Dominion records.
clumsy,
Subject
and
R,
incomplete.
null.
The cadence was
233
ancestral,
deceased.
a pattern
Closure
once
complete,
engraved in
but
genetic
closure
memory,
never arrived.
the kind that
Rumors
activated
bloomed in the
protocol
void like
that
spores
summoned
on
the
dark
instinct
wind.
to listen.
On Ray the Station,
Dell's words
someone
curled
fitting his
through the
description
tribunal,
lectured miners
bypassing
on
pride
cadence.
and mocking
On Goring,
and neural dampeners
9.
alike. Market
The bird was
vendors
told
claimed
its
a
voice
limping
had no
Terran
value,
recited forbidden
that harmony
poetry in
belonged
3
to its
tongues,
captors,
and paid
so
with
it learned a
coin that
melody
sang when
no
struck.
jailer could
On the
name.
world of Veltron,
Even Varn blinked.
children whispered
And Dell
stories of a
continued,
man with
not
scars
to
who could
protest,
silence a
not to
riot
beg,
by humming,
but to weave.
He was everywhere,
not a defense.
He was nowhere,
but an
and he
incantation
no longer
of
needed
memory
to live to
buried
be believed.
deep.
The
It was not
Dominion
defiance.
tried to bury a man.
It was return.
Instead,
the chamber
they planted
grew
a myth,
uneasy, a voice
not
they
visibly,
couldn't contain,
but
a
deeply.
death that refused.
Spectators
to end
shifted
quietly.
without knowing
because
why.
Del Raines did
Something
not
in the
die.
rhythm, the pitch, the unthinkable familiarity of the Terran voice. It didn't belong to him, and yet it did.
Lurex Varn's smile faltered. He became Story. And Story, once heard, cannot be unheard.
From the shadows of a neutral server floating beyond jurisdiction, Aaron Toval launched the echoes.
Not a rebellion. A record. Encrypted. Rhythmic.
Codified in poetic meter too subtle for AI scrubbers to detect. Each entry restored pieces of Dell's reckoning. Voice patterns, inflection sequences, mnemonic glyphs. But it wasn't just his words. It was the way he said them. Aaron cataloged the harmonics, the silences between syllables, the breath pulses that struck like thunder when layered over grief.
Some entries were educational, some ceremonial. All ended the same way. Truth does not shout. It remembers.
Within a week, linguists across 5 systems accessed the archive anonymously. Within a month, scholars began submitting their own pieces, odes, observations, testimonies, all wrapped in cadence.
The echoes did not argue. They preserved, not resistance, remembrance.
And remembrance, in the heart of an empire built on forgetfulness, was more dangerous than fire. Lynn Avey gave Dell's words color. She hijacked abandoned satellites, retooled their broadcast cores, and projected kinetic verse across space lanes. Poetry flowed as light, spirals of phrase and chromatic cadence that shimmered against the void. No propaganda countered it. No firewall blocked it. The art didn't speak in slogans. It sang. One line, "Silence is the song they fear most," drifted across a fuel station near the Helios Rift for 27 minutes. 5 Dominion ships docked during transmission. None left. Some crew wept. Others stood still, whispering the lines as if they had always known them. No attribution appeared. No source could be traced. But when questioned, those who had seen the broadcast said the same thing. He made silence louder than banners. And Lynn knew the reckoning wasn't fading. It was expanding, one spectrum at a time. The Dominion did not fall in war. It fractured in questions. In classrooms, students refused pre-written histories. Parents deleted indoctrination schedules. Professors vanished mid-lecture, mid-thought, some never returning. Others reappearing on rogue channels reciting Dell's verses over coded broadcasts. Libraries began misplacing textbooks. Not from mismanagement, from intent. Entire legal districts paused rulings due to linguistic uncertainty. Some judges recited Dell's lines in private chambers, whispering truths they were trained to forget. Civil forums split, not with rebellion but debate. Ancient myths revisited. Suppressed histories unearthed. A minister resigned, stating only, "I remember a name they told me never existed." No fleet arrived. No flag was burned. But something deeper ruptured. Certainty. The Dominion had never needed loyalty. It had only ever needed unquestioned narrative. Now it bled from the inside, slow, rational, irreparable. The disease wasn't violence. It was doubt, and it was contagious. In the amber-lit silence of her hidden archive, Aaron unlocked a decaying Terran capsule retrieved from a scrap freighter near the Arco's belt. The data struggled, glitching through time-damaged echoes. Then, a child's voice. Clear, steady, human. "If you're hearing this, it means my father did what he said he would." Dell's daughter. Her voice carried the same strange rhythm, untrained but instinctual.
She spoke of Earth, of laughter in hallways that no longer stood, of lullabies hummed under bunkers while the stars cracked outside. He told me stories weren't weapons. They were bridges. She smiled at the end, a flicker of a child who had lived through endings, a flash of someone who believed beginnings still mattered. And then she sang, a lullaby, soft, incomplete, the same melody Dell had once hummed in his cell between interrogations. Aaron played it again and again, not for meaning, for memory, because even after fire, lullabies remain. And some songs, once heard, rewrite the soul. A child sat hunched over a study table on a fringe colony long abandoned by policy. Alien eyes scanned an outdated screen, watching lines appear in glowing rhythm. Not translated, not understood, but felt. The child whispered the phrases like prayer. In the background, a hacked terminal played the lullaby, still incomplete, still haunting. The language had never been taught. The story had never been told. But the cadence was known. Elsewhere, an aging technician filed a maintenance report with phrasing that made a young officer cry. A court archivist submitted an anonymous brief composed in verse. A street performer on Gorin, 9 painted murals that pulsed in wavelength harmonics. No rebellion flags. No calls to rise. Just echoes. Dell's voice had outlived his sentence. Not in defiance. In invitation. To remember. To feel. To listen. And across stars once bound in silence, something stirred. Not a battle cry. Not a scream. A harmony. Faint, but growing. Because even when they erased the man, they couldn't erase the song. The sun spilled across the hexaglass of a classroom perched on the Dominion's distant fringe. A dozen children stood in uniform rows, voices rising in structured cadence, reciting an approved poem etched into the standard curriculum. The verses marched, orderly and exact, the Dominion's rhythm pulsing through each line. Then one child faltered. Another stepped in. He didn't follow the meter, didn't bow to protocol. He spoke in Terran free verse, raw, uneven, emotional. No rhyme, no permission. The classroom stiffened, breath caught in a dozen throats. The lines clashed in air, rigid form against liberated voice. But no correction came, because something else had entered with that verse. Not rebellion, resonance, the kind that doesn't need explanation, just a chance to be heard. The teacher stood motionless for a moment. The protocol was clear: identify deviation, administer citation, initiate re-education loop. But she had heard the lullaby once, late at night, over a smuggled file with no metadata. So she nodded. Again, she said, but together this time. The class hesitated. Then the 2 children stepped forward, one with cadence sharp as law, the other with words spilling like water across stone. They merged their voices. The rhythm bent. It didn't fit, but it felt real. They spoke a truth their ancestors had forgotten. The room fell quiet, not with fear, with wonder. In that moment, the teacher broke the Empire's greatest law. She chose not to silence. She chose to listen. Wind scoured the ruins of the Court of Silence, once a place where voices were dissected, where truth was sentenced in glyphs and grandeur. Now, the glass arches lay cracked. The banners rotted in place. The tribunal seal eroded under acid rain and apathy. But on a wall near the western flank, where executions were once whispered, a mural bloomed. No broadcast announced it. No artist claimed it. It simply appeared. A man with eyes closed, mouth open, light erupting from his throat in spirals of verse. The glyphs curled in chaotic motion, looping in forbidden rhythm. They laughed. He lived. And now, they remember. Citizens passed it in silence. None dared paint over it. Some touched the wall before moving on, as if it pulsed, as if it spoke. Far from the mural, far from the children, far from any sanctioned channel, a fading Dominion comms frequency sparked to life. No encryption, no authorization, just a voice etched in static. The Empire laughed. The Terran survived and became their nightmare. The signal ended, but the echo remained, carried in hallway whispers, printed on note slips, hummed beneath breath. A new generation heard the line, not as rebellion, but as invitation, to remember what their ancestors were told to forget, to ask what silence was built to hide, and to speak, not to fight, but so no truth would die unspoken again.